Hey everyone, welcome back to the Art2Life podcast. Excited. I've been working on some paintings upstairs and trying to finish them. And then I thought, oh my God, this is like so hard to finish these paintings, and I get so many questions around finishing, and I can't believe I've never talked about it. So I just came down here, and I'm going to just share what's going on in my head around finishing because I think this is challenging for a lot of reasons. Let me just dive into this around the challenges people face around finishing. And I think there's more than this. This is just the ones that were top of mind for me. Um, how, the challenges around finishing, what holds us back from from getting completion? And first and foremost, of course, it's not knowing when something's done. There's a level of experience needed to finish something. We get pretty good at starting things because we start a lot more things than we finish them. Like that's pretty easy. But it's this hard thing of finishing and knowing when something's finished and how far to go with it. So there's just a general experience level that, if you're just starting out, this is a practice, just like starting or just like being in the middle, the messy middle part. And there's these passages of art making that need to be learned, and you learn them by going into them and experiencing it. There's resistance, though, to finishing, and let me talk about this. And this is definitely something that occurs for folks who are more on the earlier side in their art making, although I still struggle with this, so maybe it's relevant for all of us. I've talked about this before, about this idea about the gap, about what you envision your art is going to be and how good it's going to be and all the possibilities before you start, or maybe just as you're starting, that this thing could be so amazing and you're all excited. And then you keep going and you can imagine what you want, but where you end up isn't where you imagine. But you know enough to know what the better thing is, where you want to be, but you don't know yet how to get there. There's a gap, in other words, between where you end and where you want to be. And I mean, I think that's probably happens for all of us to a different degree. But in the beginning, the gap's really big. And so much so that it can be really frustrating. So to sort of admit it by saying, okay, this is done, it's miles from where I want it to be, that's kind of rough. That's hard to sometimes keep going. And a lot of times people stop. They have a whole bunch of unfinished work because it just presents these problems, these challenges, and we're not equipped to know how to finish something. We're not equipped to be okay with where we are. Like, that's missing for a lot of people. There's limiting beliefs around what's possible, and we beat ourselves up if it isn't as good as we wanted it to be, and then we stop. And so definitely, when I've hit hard patches, there's all these unfinished paintings lying around, and it just becomes kind of overwhelming. It's like, I don't know how to finish. Why should I start another one? Because it's just gonna be where these end up. There's no completion. There's just something that's kind of missing. And finishing can definitely galvanize your next steps. And we're gonna dive into that. So I'm just touching upon these challenges of why this damn thing's so hard. And then I'm going to talk about how to do this finishing, and then give you some tips on how to wire this, or just some ideas to make finishing easier. When we say, okay, I'm done, and that's it, that is almost this brutal honesty where we have to get real with ourselves and say, today, this isn't so good, and this is the best I could do. And, I think a lot about running. I do a lot of running, and I used to do all these little races, and, I was like pretty much at the back of the heap of people in terms of speed, the bottom third or whatever. And it was challenging because you're competing and you're trying to be the best you can. And it was always amazing. But what got me through being able to do this was that I would just say, well, this is just today, you know. Tomorrow I could be amazing, but today, this is just where I was, given all the things, all the conditions, my fitness, everything. This is just one day. It's just a snapshot. Tomorrow could be completely different. So there was always this possibility that I might do better later, which is such a great reframe, you know. So that's a really powerful way to to just assess where you are. That it's just this snapshot in time, and tomorrow will be completely different. Like this thing can get going, you know, if you can learn to get rid of the resistance in your work, if you can learn to understand how finishing can help you so much progress, this doesn't have to be a long-term problem. You can completely wire this. But that is scary just to own it, you know, own it. This is it. This is me. I mean, the whole thing with art is showing your authenticity and where you are and being okay with that and actually leaning into that. I mean, that's what's going to make the art amazing. We have to leverage that, but it's also just being real. Like I've only been doing this thing for a year, and this is as good as it is right now, and it's going to get better. The other thing around finishing is that we can try really hard to finish something. And so much so that we can almost over finish it. Like white knuckling finishing it. And we can lose our objectivity around this, where we're insecure about where we're stopping. So we just keep fussing and we keep trying to make it even more finished and more finished and more finished. And can get really tired. And you know, there's no exact way to know how to determine that, but you can kind of feel it when you look at your work, and it just feels labored, you know, and it's a felt sense when you look at it, when you're done. It's like there was a chance, there was a time in the work, and I see this in my own work, when this thing just kind of was like flowing and kind of came out of me, and I did a little effort, and then it's like, wow, I was in this great place. And then I kept going, you know, and I kept working it, and then it kind of didn't get as good. And so I like pushed even harder. So there, and it can just get, just get really tiring, you know, and so that can make us avoid, that's hard. Finishing hard like that is not fun. And it kind of ruins the work in a way. It definitely tires it out for you. So there's a degree of mindset around thinking, like, what are you trying to do? And what would be a win? And how can you do this? How can you just finish it and have it not be such an epic moment in time? But this does not have to be such a birth, that this can be done right here, right now. Like, look what I did. It was white before, and now this thing I've made, it was blank, and now it's this. And maybe that's enough, right? You know, I remember being in art school, and I went to art center, and they had this really, we had to all take wood shop. And there was an assignment in this fine arts class that we had to use the wood shop, and the assignment was to create something that already exists, an object from our lives, common object, a thumbtack, whatever, anything from your life, but recreate it in another material than what it is. And so, and we had we had all these lessons in this wood shop, and you could do things in steel, and incredible, like a full-blown engineering shop. Like we could do anything you want, any material. And so, for example, one kid did a jar of Jif peanut butter with a knife, scooping some of it out, and he made that thing out of hardwood. Like it looked like peanut butter, and he made it, carved it, and smoothed it, and he spent weeks on it. And I got into this thing, and I ended up doing a 409 like cleanser bottle, like a pretty industrial bottle, and I made it out of teak, and it was so much work, and all the little pieces. I mean, this was weeks and weeks and weeks. And one kid made like a beautiful leather purse like you imagine a purse that's 10 years old, that's gorgeous and just laid down on a table, how that leather would just kind of relax, and the handle. But he made it out of rosewood, and it was just such a sight. It looked so real and it was so beautiful. And the whole idea here, of course, was that it becomes an interruption when you see something. I mean, it's amazing to see an object that we know and recognize, that's so familiar, that becomes something else because of the material. So it really highlighted materials, and it's a cool idea, or the scale, taking a thumbtack and making a thumbtack 4 feet tall. You will re-experience the thumbtack in a different way. But this was kind of an amazing thing, and lots to learn there. But it was such a birth, and I spent so long trying to finish this project, and I stayed up late, and the whole idea was just use different materials, and I hated this thing, and I just struggled with it, and I knew that everyone was going to do these amazing things, and mine was. Anyway, and I didn't even really know how good to do with woodworking. I wasn't so good at it, and carving and sanding and oiling, all of the things. And I remember we had the critique, and this other kid, so everyone did these amazing projects, and giant thumbtacks and small things, and all this work. But the one guy did he made a lamp, and he made a lamp. He took a whole bunch of pieces of corrugated cardboard, just like boxes, and he glued them together. And then he carved like a table lamp out of it, like the shade, the bottom part. And it was just so cool. And he did it like the weekend before the crit. And it was amazing. And I just never forgot it, because the way he thought about this project, the way he just wanted to take the idea that he wanted and do it in a simple way, and that could be finished. It didn't have to be this polished thing that was so impressive. It was incredible to just see a table lamp all made out of cardboard. So I always think about that. Like, there's your thinking involved, that maybe you can reframe how you think about what you need it to be done. I think sometimes we're really hard on ourselves, and it's got to be this monumental thing, and it's unobtainable maybe, and it's stressful, and it can really take the fun out of what we're doing. So I just think that's a really important notion, because we ultimately are in control of this process. We're doing it. We're finishing things. We're setting up the whole thing. How we think about it, how we feel about it, how much energy we have. It's all an inside job. We are creating this thing. So you can make it any way you want, right? What is the criteria for finishing? And I know there's a gajillion, but I'm just going to hit some of the ones that I teach and some of the ones that I think about. And the first one has to do with its impact, and how you feel when you look at this thing. Does it create a sense of wonder in you? And that's the best word I have found. That forget about what you're trying to do. It should just maybe a little bit just lift you, remove you from your day to day, and just, oh my God, like, wow, this is something. This is something, It's a high bar, but if that work can do that for you, that means it's kind of fresh. It means you've entered into new territory for yourself, because it's a wonder because you haven't seen it before. It's a wonder because you've never made anything like that. That this is new for you, and probably for other people. So I use that when I look at something. If I'm saying, okay, is this done? Does this do that? Does this create a state of wonder? Does it, or a little bit even? And that's a bar. That's a standard that I use. And it really pushes me to not fall in love too early, because always the things that I glom onto in the early stages, they just they don't have that. They're like lower bar art for me. And it always takes a little bit more work to push it. The other thing that I talk a lot about in terms of what helps something feel finished for you and for the viewer looking at it, and this is something I talk a lot about in the Creative Visionary program, this loud conversation and this quiet conversation. Basically, what does the work look like from across the room, from a distance, from, really far away? Is that pattern of light and dark, because that's what you're going to see from across the room. You're not going to see details. You probably won't even be able to see the color so much. You'll just see a pattern of dark and light. And is that pattern, whether it's realism or whether it's abstract or figurative, that pattern wants to be exciting to look at abstractly. That's really important, because why? If you see something, that's what's going to have a person walk over to look at it. We want to have, and I call that the loud conversation, the primary thing of your work, that pattern of light and dark, because that directs everything. That's a very noticeable, it's the most noticeable aspect of your art from a distance. Now, so that has to be exciting. Now, as you get closer and closer and closer and come up really close, you can start noticing subtlety. And that's the quiet conversation, the subtlety. And what happens in that needs to be really beautiful, needs to be interesting, needs to be different. And it's helpful, I think, to have that subtlety, to have some nuance in the work. The nuance and the subtlety in relationship to the loud and the bold, right? The subtle with the bold, those are opposites. And when you mix them together, they complement each other so beautifully, and it elevates the work. It gives it a sense of completion, because it's like having a full meal, like you ever go to a restaurant and the portions are so small, you're still kind of hungry. It's the worst feeling. Like you want to feel completed. You want to be nurtured. You want to experience boldness of the artist, and we want to experience the flip side of that and the subtlety. To have both of those in the work is a great barometer of something that has completion, that is satisfying to behold. I like to think about, like, is this personal? Is what I've made personal compared to everything in the past? Have I moved things along? So looking at this thing in relationship to what you've made previously is helpful in determining its completion. It's pretty great to make something and feel like you've taken it a little further. I think for all of us, that's very satisfying. Anytime you can measure progress, it makes the progressing more sustainable. So looking at your thing you've made here, and this is what's so great about having lots of work in your studio, some that are done that you love over in the corner. So you can look over there and see, did I take ground here? Did I take territory? Did I move the needle? Is this thing the next step? What is new in here that I haven't done before? We want to bring in some of that. And that makes it really feel complete. That's a big step. And it's great. Like, what am I trying to do here? Did I do more of it? Did I take it further? So that's also really important. When we're focused on finishing, it's challenging because we slow down and our changes are less. Right? In the beginning, it's easy to stay focused. It's easy to be objective because everything's changing. And so we see it constantly with fresh eyes. But as we complete things and we're getting things closer, the degree of severity of the moves in general, the changes get less. They get less, they get less, they get less, till you just find adjusting things at the end. But because it's getting less, you can lose your objectivity because you're staring at the same thing. So a great way to kind of keep on top of this is don't give yourself a time limit to move it towards being complete, and don't try to finish it all in that 30 minutes or whatever. Just leave it. And I do this all the time. I'll just leave it and say to myself, okay, I think it's done, but maybe not, probably not. I'll see you tomorrow. And I come in and I look at it and it's like, what was I thinking? This thing is, I don't even know what was I thinking of even doing, right? We tend to, because we're staring at it, we just keep going. And then we become hyper vigilant about the things in it. And then we start fussing with it. And then we keep going. And then we fuss more. And it's like a whole rabbit hole. So having some time constraints on this thing can be really, really, really helpful. When I created the Creative Visionary program, 6 or 7 years ago, it was the same kind of problem. I had this idea that I was going to teach artists everything, and the approach that I use in my 7 day workshops, and it's a whole procession, and it's a whole sort of like 3 step framework, and it's got all these things in it. And I was so focused on doing this in an online situation that I kind of went overboard with all the lessons. Like I kept adding to it, and it's like, well, I think it's done. I mean, it was done weeks earlier, and I just kept going because, well, I can add this and I can add that and I can add that, and well, I'll give 2 versions of this and 2 versions of that. I ended up making this program that was 3 months long, which is fine, but and if you talk to anyone who's done our Creative Visionary program, there's just a ton in it. But there used to be more, and it used to be totally overwhelming. It took me about 3 years to understand how to take a lot of these things away because people were getting overwhelmed. But it came as a result. I just lost my objectivity. It's like you can't just take a person and change them in 12 weeks completely. It takes time. You don't need 300 lessons. 100 will do it. So that's just, I always think about that. It's like, oh my God, don't keep above what you're doing a little bit, dropping into it and thinking that it's you and just attaching so much to it really impedes our ability to play God in this situation and direct it to its best outcome. It's important to see each piece of art you're making, not in and of itself, like you just stare, is this thing done? But really look at it in a continuum. That this piece of art is it fits in with other things. All the answers of how far it's gone are related to what you've been making before. So definitely make it easy for yourself to see the previous work, preferably in order. I mean, I talk about working in series, but having those 6 or 7 pieces of art that you've made prior to this one in the space, so you can look and you can see what it is. And that takes the pressure off. This is just you rolling and generating things and then getting to a completion with it so you can roll into something else. And it's like a yoga practice. It's not overly focusing on this one artifact of this process. That whether it's finished to the 12th degree or finished to the 9th degree is not, you've got most of it, right? You got most of the thing is working, and that's important to realize. And that's enough, right? That's enough if you can stay motivated and excited, right? But just calling it. So let me hit a couple things like that have helped me, ways of thinking about this. That um, the art of finishing is learned by just stopping. It's pretty easy. You can just stop, and you're going to stop sometimes too early, and you'll know that eventually. And then sometimes you're going to learn by stopping too late. And you see this happens where your work is kind of tired out and worn down, and you just like let it go. Um, but you need to stop. You need to just call it and then learn from that. That's completely okay. So most people who I've worked with and what I see working from my experience is that we don't take our work far enough. And I think it has more to do more in the earlier stages, that There isn't the bold risks. There isn't the territory that's gained earlier. We kind of play it safe. And then the act of finishing a kind of safe piece of art, it's just can be, it's not as exciting as just kind of like working with something that's really exciting and then just letting it be itself and just stopping it and just kind of completing it and tidying it up and just kind of refining it a little bit. It still holds, therefore, this big territory gain, this big movement that you gain, this big risk is in there. So my advice on this when you're working towards as you're finishing, in the mid stages, that pretty soon you're going to be refining things. You're going to be taking less risks. So go for it. Go for it in those middle stages. Be bolder than you normally would, and let finishing, the act of finishing, being a pulling back. Go so far that you've gone too far. That is so great a practice, because if you don't, you're going to stop. You're just going to stop yourself, and you're going to be miles from possibly where it could have been. But if you go all the way to the edge of this thing and then beyond, and then realize, no, this has gone too far, then the finishing aspect of finishing could be pulling back, and you can get it just where you want it. And the work will have a feeling that it was really advanced, that something is on the edge here. And that's the kind of work that's exciting to look at. And it's it has longevity, that kind of work. And buyers resonate with it. I mean, it's your best work when you've pushed it as far as you kind of can. It's about contrasts ultimately. When we finish something, we're kind of refining it. We're adjusting things, and we need to be very, very sensitive to do that. Like, turn up the degree of sensitivity. But we also want to have in your work a sense that you were free in it, that you were not worrying about finishing when you were doing that. And when you put those two parts together, just like the quiet and the loud, right? The bold and the subtle, we have finished areas, and we have areas that maybe don't need to be finished, that there's no point. We already have enough finished areas. And it's just, and of course, everyone's work is different and how you would interpret this. But I'm just saying that it's about contrast in powerful work. It's about having boldness with subtlety, having something that's finished, and then being okay with letting something be open and wild and not finished. Those look so good together. They feel good. And it feels good because you get both those feelings. You're experiencing both those feelings. So yeah, so just leaving something undone. You see this, like sometimes you'll see an amazing painting and there's a big chunk of raw canvas, and it's just, you love it because it's like, this is not made here, and I can go to this undone place, and then I can also experience the high level of finish in another area. Those are really wonderful. So again, it's your thinking. If you can remember that you're driving this bus, and it's not just like I finish it and I'm going to just finish it and finish, everything's got to be perfect. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Even finishing, the work is still in play, and how it's going to be felt and seen needs to be held by you, and from a distance, from like, you're making it, but you're also just conducting it. We want to have that objectivity. And then to realize that this finishing, why it's so important and why I'm even talking about it today and wanting to be helpful in this regard, is that it's really when you get a ton of learning. Finishing is when you finish something, and then the learning comes rushing in. It doesn't really come in when you're postponing everything by saying, well, it's not really done yet. And you know how we say this, right? People say, oh, what are you working on? Well, this, but it's not really done. It's kind of this way to like not draw the line. But if you can just a little bit and say, this is done, then it gets to be looked at in a different way, and we can consider it and know. I mean, every time I post something on Instagram, the gallery will text me and say, is that done? Because they're just waiting for, they don't want to fully embrace it, you know. So I think there's this psychological thing that you've got to say it's done for, and this is done for this day, you know. Tomorrow your done will be even better or whatever. But owning that and putting a line in the sand, and then checking out the feelings and the reality of what you've made and thinking about it, is powerful. There's learning there. Questions like, okay, this thing that I made, there it is, I made it, it's done, it's going to live in the world forever, and it's done, there it is. How is that what I just made going to help me move? Is this helping me move towards where I envision I'm going? Is this as exciting as what I was doing before? Did I go far enough? What does this say about me? What am I trying to say? Do I know? Does this help me know better? Was this exciting to me? Does this make me feel more alive when I look at it than if I don't? Like all the questions, all the learning kind of comes in, is like an exclamation mark, you know? It's made possible. The learning is made possible by coming in and showing up, leaving, coming in, showing up, absent, visitation, back and forth. And you get so much in that. And then there's that stopping point where you say, stop now. And that moment is when all the learning happens. And it's the chapter. And then what's so great, and hopefully if you finish properly and taking some of these ideas in, finishing should just make you feel like more buoyant, more like the flywheel of your practice is working great. You made a thing today. You completed a thing. And what does that mean? And I'm excited to do the next one and the next one and the next one. How'd it go today? It was good. I finished this. I finished a picture. Like, that's pretty amazing. And we just sometimes don't take advantage of this moment, or just really appreciate it and really wire it. Learn to finish this stuff, you know? And that trail of work behind you will just add to your momentum, will add to the direction, you know, gaining clarity by all the things that are finished. Or maybe they were called too early, or maybe they were called too late, but they're all in queue behind you, and they're adding to your momentum for the next picture you're making, for the next series, for what you want to do 2 years from now, 5 years from now. It starts to give you information when you complete a thing. You get to start a new chapter, and that should give you an uptick in energy. The focus is let go, and suddenly you've got a different experience now. You're now free. You now get to start all over, and you don't even know what it's going to be. And you've come through the opposite experience of just focusing and trying to do a thing, and then you stop and you let that go, and now you re-release into a new series. And so it's just a beautiful kind of journey of it. But that transition from stopping, from completing, into the new thing is made so much better by just calling it and putting a period there. You guys, thanks so much for being here. There's a lot of thoughts around this, and I'm sure there's more. But this is how I've learned to finish, and what I use to gauge whether something's done or not. Listen, if you like this podcast and you found it helpful, please share it with a friend, and please leave a review. That's really, really helpful. I guess that's what drives this thing, and more people are finding out about this podcast, which is really just attributed to you guys sharing it. So thanks so much for doing that. And if you want to go to listen to other podcasts, please subscribe And if you go to art2life.com and click on podcasts, you can see show notes and you can find out all about previous episodes. We've got a ton of stuff there, and I invite you to check it out. Thanks, you guys. I will see you real soon. Okay.